Alright, this morning we're going to cover Introduction to Hadoop. And I'm going to start with covering some of the misconceptions about Hadoop and then kind of what it's useful for, and understanding that you could probably find anyone on the internet to disagree with anything if you really wanted to. But generally speaking, if we're talking about Hadoop, we're definitely in the world of analysis, and it's incredibly useful for that. So one of the first biggest myths about Hadoop is that ETL development is unnecessary. Now, in my ETL course, we cover some of the best practices of ETL development. We cover how to automate extract, and we cover how to automate load, and then some of the patterns of transform. I'm going to use websites as kind of a side example here. You will never be able to automate every single thing in ETL, especially transform, because like websites, you can get things, you can get code and build code with websites that make it easier to develop a website, but your client is always going to, or you're going to get clients that are going to have exceptional taste. As a case in point, when websites, what was it, a couple of years ago, there was this huge buzz about having social media bars in the top right corner. And I mean, that was the thing, right? Or you would even have a social media bar on the right part of your screen. Sometimes people would do left. And it was, so you would have like the social media bar, then your blog post would be over here on the left, and then you would have these menus on the right. And you can still find websites like that. But now, the newer website, which is more sales oriented and they based it off of what people click on, it's like you have this top bar, and then you'll click on things in the top bar and it hovers or quickly skips to that part of the page. And part of it is because it's a more sales optimized page for now. But anything that involves people like this, so as you study people and as you provide people what they want, people's tastes change. It's very similar to fashion. People never understand this about fashion, but the whole idea with fashion is that girls who usually spend way more money than men on clothes, they want to get the clothes that nobody else has. But as it starts to become mainstream, it becomes less cool. Same thing with websites. As every website does something a certain way, it becomes less and less cool. So now you want another website that's going to do it this way. So that way you stand out. And the other thing too is if everybody's trying to build a sales page in the exact same way, it starts to lose its effectiveness, because then all of those sales pages are similar and very few of them stand out. So it's the same with Hadoop in the sense, or I'm sorry, with analytics in the sense that you're always going to get that client that's going to want some type of analysis that other clients don't want. And so there's going to be some similarities in the way that you build the structure, but it's never going to be identical. So yes, ETL development will always be necessary in those senses. Now, as far as the import and the load, well, yeah, you may be able to completely automate that. As far as a transform, that's going to be per client. And each of my clients that I do transforms for, I can tell you, it can really differ big time. Now, Hadoop, another misconception is that it's a competitor to MongoDB. MongoDB's engine is highly optimized for OLTP, and while sure you could, I guess, use it for OLAP, you're not really using technology for what it's good for. It's kind of like people comparing MongoDB to SQL Server. MongoDB is a document-oriented database. SQL Server is not. If you're using SQL Server for documents, you are a complete moron. I would never store like a book in SQL Server. It's just, that's not what it's for. That's way out of place. SQL Server is great for like banking data, which Mongo would not be good for. It's a completely different database engine as far as what it's useful for. So if people start comparing Mongo to SQL Server or Hadoop to MongoDB, I'm like, which one's better than the other? I'm like, you don't even understand what you're talking about. You're not, we're talking about OLTP tools versus OLAP tools. We're talking about document structure, versus more of like, I always think of it like banking and transactional atomic structure. And then of course, finally, I'm not sure where this one comes from at all, but I've seen this one a lot, which is you can't use SQL with Hadoop. So there are people who use, for instance, SQL Server with Hadoop. There are people who use PostgreSQL with Hadoop. it is a tool, it is a structure, it is not something that limits what you can do. In fact, there are a lot of people, by the way, who use MongoDB with Hadoop. So it's not exclusive. Okay, it's the same thing that I can have SQL Server and MongoDB on the same machine. It's not like, oh, if I have one, I can't have the other. Not at all. It doesn't work that way. So those are just some misconceptions, and when you hear them, you know that if you hear any of these three, you know that the person who's talking about it has no idea what they're talking about. They probably just read some indifferent article on the internet, and it's a great thing about the internet. You can find someone with any opinion, and the IT community in general, I point this out a lot, but it tends to attract people who like to argue for the sake of arguing. So the reason why all three of these are misconceptions is because they're great arguments to have, right? In other words, if you sit there and you're like, I'm going to be the person who comes out and says that ETL development is unnecessary. Yes, exactly. You can start all kinds of arguments saying that. Same thing with this one, and same thing with this one. So, but those are all misconceptions, and that is not, none of these are true about Hadoop. So we're going to be covering Hadoop in this series, and but these are the very common misconceptions. And so as we continue, you will see that all three of these things are wrong, and then it just depends on how you want to use it. Hadoop is very useful for analysis. It is very useful for OLAP, and then of course if you are a developer, especially if you like object-oriented programming, you will see a lot of strengths with Hadoop.